Welcome to Season 2 of Into the Forge, the Lemnos podcast talking with hardware entrepreneurs about the journey, tools, and lessons that shape their startup and product. In this episode, I'll be talking with Dave Merrill and Clint Cope, the co-founders of Elroy Air. Dave and Clint are building autonomous aircraft systems to deliver goods to the world's most remote places. Hey guys, welcome to the show. Why don't you give me your name, your background, what are you guys working on?
Great. I'm Dave Merrill, CEO of Elroy Air.
And I'm Clint Cope, co-founder of Elroy Air.
And we are a transportation company in aerospace space. So we are developing a system to carry goods, carry cargo by air over hundreds of miles.
Gotcha. And so, Dave, you're our first repeat podcast interview. So
awesome.
Last season, which was many years ago.
Happy to be back.
Our show was off the air for a couple of years, but you were working with Siftio and now Elroy. So I think there's a great story for both of you to tell about how you started this particular hardware company.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the high level of how we started it was Clint and I realized it could be done.
Okay.
And realized that it could change the world if it was done, and that we were uniquely suited to do it. And that was so exciting that we just got started immediately.
But I think in between here and there, you might have even picked up some experience points relative to where you are now.
Sure. Yeah, we can go back into there. Do you want to start with your background, Clint?
Prior to Elroy, my wife and I shuttled off to the Bay Area from Georgia Tech. Didn't realize how crazy California was with innovation culture. It was definitely very different than what I'd experienced back east. Coming out of the gate, I ran an ID company, product development company, and that gave me exposure to a lot of startups, but it was mainly working with them as a contractor. Those experiences gave me the bravery to start my own startup, and I was doing performance parts for Mini Coopers using rapid manufacturing, and a lot of stuff in the drone industry is made using rapid manufacturing. And
did you get to race around the track in Coopers?
And
I think that's why he started the company.
But
he wanted to win.
And I could write all that off. So it was great. And sold off the IP for that company. Got offered a full-time job at one of my first startup experience was at Goldilocks. And so I helped them kind of get the house in order in terms of getting a line of products together and fixing stuff from the vendor side so that their quality was high. And then got offered a gig at 3D Robotics, and that's where Dave and I met. And so Dave and I used to sit next to each other. We started noticing that we liked each other as people, and then as we grew at the company in terms of our experience, got to work on some projects together. When Dave switched into his role of head of enabling technology.
Tech.
Yeah.
So you guys worked at 3D Robotics.
We did. So I'll say a little more about how I landed there. Originally I specialized in computer science. That's what I studied, was cognitive science. I was at Stanford doing symbolic systems, and then did a master's in computer science, and then went to the MIT Media Lab, and basically became a computer scientist that fell in love with hardware. And I think the reason why was that I actually grew up building physical things, like building woodworking and building things out of metal and all kinds of stuff like that. And so when I discovered electronics and hardware, it was this amazing fusion of my interest in software with building physical stuff. So I never really looked back. So I had started a company right out of grad school that was like a kids learning system called Siftio. And it was a collection of little interactive cubes, kind of like smart alphabet blocks. And so we had shipped 2 generations of that product, all the way from idea on a napkin to retail. And then we were midway through developing a third product when we were acquired by 3D Robotics, the famous drone company over in Berkeley, which is run by Chris Anderson from Wired magazine. And so we basically landed at 3D Robotics and became the product team, or became the kernel of their product team, because that was a moment where 3D Robotics was leveling up, and they had realized, hey, there's this big opportunity out there happening in consumer drones, and we've got a position that would allow us to make a really solid, good, competitive consumer drone. But they'd only made DIY level kind of kits and parts for hobbyists up till then. So we came in, not having built a drone before, but knowing how to ship high polish, good UX consumer products, and basically took over the product process and did a bunch of hiring and organized the process to ship the Solo drone about a year later.
Okay.
So that was a big project in the beginning, and then, as Clint said, I rolled off of that once we had shipped Solo, and I was leading R&D, and we got a chance to collaborate on some of the R&D projects that my little group was doing, where basically we were looking for the capabilities that would differentiate the next generation of 3D robotics drones. Mm-hmm. And so looking at all kinds of new sensors like LiDAR and radar and computer vision, special chips for computer vision, things like that. And so we built a few things together, and I realized, wow, Clint is awesome. Like, he's great at building things. He's easy to work with. And then also he's got this amazing knowledge of supply chain. Like, he just remembers every component he ever saw. And I realized he would be a great person to build something ambitious with. And that thought came back around about, I guess it was like a year later. We had parted ways for a while. 3DR got to a point where they were feeling so much competitive pressure from China in the consumer drone space that they decided to kind of shift gears directly into software. So that's at the point where I actually left the company and came to join Lemnos as an entrepreneur in residence. And then Clint had gone to Airware a little bit before that to lead mechanical engineering over there. And so we met back up, about a year after we had been working together, and started talking about opportunities in bigger drones. We both become very interested and experienced in building things that fly, and realized, hey, there seems to be a lot of noise and a lot of competition at the small scale, like the small camera drone, small delivery drone scale. But it seems like there's opportunities to make something bigger and make something that's really useful that nobody's doing yet at a larger scale. And so that's where we got excited and started working on Elroy Air.
So it's not only your transition to Elroy Air, but really how you got to meet as founders. And it's always a question entrepreneurs have. They always ask, how do you find founders? How do I find my co-founder? And it's interesting, over time you guys had met, but it took, a little bit more. You had worked in one thing and then you came back together a year later.
Yeah, in my direct experience, I have a couple data points now. It's been so helpful to have worked with somebody already in some capacity. Like, my first company was a longtime college friend, and Jeevan Kalanathi. We'd been in a rock band together and worked on school projects, and so that established a working relationship that we knew each other and trusted each other. And then Clint and I, like he said, sat next to each other and worked together on some projects. And I think, that was enough for me to realize, like, this guy's great. I want to work with this guy again, even though it wasn't as long of a duration that we had to get to know each other.
Yeah, you get these opportunities to, sure, you get to see somebody's working style, but I think that's only half of it. I feel like, especially given some of the challenges that we were handed at 3DR, I got to see Dave, go through kind of catalog after catalog after catalog of vendor parts, and then have these negotiations with how is this thing actually going to work, and then sell it in terms of actually putting a program together. And so I was just always impressed with Dave's way of just organizing materials, forming cogent arguments on that stuff, and then also kind of coming up with what the extension of a technology could be, and kind of giving these mini challenges to your group to build something in a fast period of time to show that it was possible. So yeah, Dave definitely was one of those people that was he gets what innovation culture is, and I totally would want to work with him if whatever place he ends up. Yeah, I honestly did not expect Dave to just dive into another startup, but he's a glutton for punishment.
Especially one building drones, huh?
Oh my God. Well, yeah, I couldn't have thought we would want to take a break from that.
I don't know. No, I guess once you start, it's hard to stop.
It's true.
I just find it interesting that Dave's co-founder's rock star and a race car driver. Maybe one way to upsample
the sequence. Yeah.
Yeah.
pretty good
So
track record.
we've talked a little bit about Dave's, hardware background, and in fact, you want to learn more about that, you can even go back a season in our episodes and listen to a little more. But Clint, had you, you talked a little bit about Mini Coopers and all that, but before that, even growing up, had you worked on hardware before? Is this something that was in your genes all along, or is it something that you self-learned later on? How did you get to here?
I think I always had a pretty natural mechanical curiosity and an aptitude toward that. I mean, I think that probably the deepest, it probably started with radio controlled cars, which starts with a lot of people. I think that's a pretty consistent theme. That building those Tamiya RC cars, and then I got so bored with them over the course of the first couple of weeks of building the kit is that I would be hacking parts and moving them back and forth in between kits. And, I was doing that for a really long time, kind of driving my parents nuts on every way possible I could break these things. But I mean, I think that the moment that, my parents would bring up as the moment that they knew that, I was going to, be involved in hardware was the day that my father and my grandfather were struggling to install a hanging toaster in our kitchen. And they tried every which way possible, and they were about to put it back in the box, and I kind of grabbed my grandfather by the kind of pocket of his pants, and I said, the bracket's on backward, Grandpa. And sure enough, Dad and Grandpa turned the bracket around, and the toaster fits. So yeah, it was one of those things that definitely was a nice memory of, yeah, sure, I've always loved this stuff.
So you alluded to this a little bit ago about how you made the decision of what Elroy Air would be working on, but it's that tough decision. You have so many different things you can do. How did you decide what would be your first product? And I think if you could elaborate on that, you picked something in a new area, like a burgeoning area, and some new things. How did you look at that from a risk perspective and evaluate all that as you compress down to this market segment that you're looking at?
Yeah, well, I guess two parts of that. One, how did we arrive at this general vertical at all? When I was spent 6 months here at Lemnos as an entrepreneur in residence, part of what I was doing was just helping out with coaching some of the teams here, but a lot of my time was evaluating product concepts and company concepts. And I had taken a very methodical approach to picking the best concept to run with, or so I thought, because I had this list, I had a spreadsheet with ideas that had been going into it for the past decade, and I'd been scoring them and trying to figure out which ones got high marks on all these metrics that I decided were important. After that process had been going for a while, a conversation sparked this idea of a very large drone. And actually, to be fair, in the earliest days, the idea was to carry people. That it would be a human transport, kind of an air taxi drone. And this was early in the kind of current wave of such things, where there's a lot more companies now than there were a year ago. We're trying to build that vision. But it just seemed, it was this combination of, wow, this is possible, after looking at the details of what it would take to build something like that. And nobody's successfully done it yet. And it would change society if we had a way to get people around point to point. And so that was really the origin of the enthusiasm for this space. Now, that idea hadn't been in the spreadsheet. It sort of came in from the side.
I remember.
And then blew everything else off, out of the water. And so took that idea to Clint. And
I lost money on that, by the way. I had picked something else on the list.
Yeah, this idea just, it was so potent. So we had this session where we were talking about it with a couple other friends who became advisors to the company. And that's where we realized, this is possible. It's from a technical point of view, there's going to be regulatory things to figure out about it, but we can do this. And so that was enough, that sort of, moving from that more quantified, quantitative look at a bunch of different ideas to something that just hit us in the gut and immediately seemed like a very powerful idea. It still had to pass on the criteria, but there were a few ideas kind of down to that final finish line, and this one just like raced across, I would say. And
Clint, how did you, like, when as this idea is forming, you're storming and norming, how do you prioritize and commit to it as you're processing it?
When I looked at what, just the challenge of it, it seemed like one of those things that it wasn't sitting within the realm of impossible anymore. I think I definitely needed a bit more data to go and make the leap. So I was kind of assisting with Dave going through some of the mental gymnastics of whether it was possible, and then that was sold as soon as we brought those kind of friends on board and kind of worked through the whole problem space. So to me, I mainly needed to feel like I was solving a valuable societal problem, and all of everything from urban sprawl to you name it, it ends up seeing some level of addressing those problems using VTOL systems.
And how did you, again, I'll come back to that, looked at the risk side of it? Like some products you look at building, you're like, okay, there's predecessors to it, you sort of know how customers react, you can maybe even understand some basic economics. In the area that you're looking at, it's new. Mm-hmm. And so how did you both think about sort of the risk analysis and be comfortable with that, knowing that you had more risk and that you were navigating an area with maybe a little less historical data?
Yeah, I think it's high risk and high reward compared to ideas where the product concept is a little more of a well-trodden path. And to me, in the early days, that was the most exciting thing about it. And you'll hear other entrepreneurs say this, but if we knew how hard certain parts of this would be, like I won't say I wouldn't have done it, but it's like you never can see all the pitfalls along the way when you start something ambitious, and I think that's probably a good thing. And so it was just there's a lot of risk and unknown in a thing that's this ambitious and big, but we mapped out enough of it in those early sessions to feel comfortable. Like, okay, we'll definitely get to the point of building something that works, and as we go along the way, we're going to figure out a lot of the other stuff, like how does this fit into the regulatory picture? Where do we operate this system first? All the details of exactly which parts and vendors we're going to use. Like that all comes into focus as time goes on. And we just had to be comfortable in the beginning knowing that we didn't know everything about how this would play out over time. But it's like a mental discipline, I think, that's hard. And we can, I'll say, I continue to try to coach myself and get better at like operating without fear, even though I don't know all the answers of how things will play out.
All right.
Yeah, and I mean it's also one of those things where we extend that same sentiment to the team even now. We're like, yeah, we know that you're not going to be able to solve everything right now, but like come to us with like how you'd solve the problem. Mm-hmm. And the great thing is that like I think between the two of us, I mean your network is pretty insane, but like we've been able to like have this like support group of people that are so excited about what we're doing that if we can't solve it internally, we end up finding folks that just are tremendous at helping us simplify things we think are going to be really complex. Mm-hmm.
It sounds like there was a nugget of wisdom that I think I'd like to highlight, which is that idea that no matter what you do, you're going to run into unknown and difficult things, and it's almost how you approach those and how you teach your team to absorb those and to work through them is how you at the end of the day solve.
Yeah, and I think there's another one which is something like luck favors the prepared, which is basically you could look at any company concept and you could shoot it down because of something that makes it seem too hard or not possible or this part's never going to work. But my experience now is that once you just start doing it and get yourself into the place where you're starting to do it, two things happen. One, you're committed. So you kind of have to keep going in a certain way, but also you start to see things and understand how to do things that you never would have been able to see far enough from that initial moment to know how it was going to play out. So you in a way, you always have to start without having all the answers.
Yeah, and I, as a slight extension of that, I always look at that as a co-founder's like 10,000 hours that they really need to put into their project before like they just kind of like live and breathe it all day. There's kind of that period of like, oh my God, there's all this stuff I just want to figure out and just drink in everything that's there. And once you're at that point, it's kind of magical, frankly, and you can carry that charisma back to the team.
So what kind of engagement have you focused on with Elroy Air in terms of like mentors and advisors and colleagues in the community? We always hear entrepreneurs ask us this question. It's like, should I go get advisors, and how many of them should I have, and what do they do? So in your experience, maybe even reaching back through your previous startups, but into Elroy Air, how did you approach surrounding yourselves with other folks?
I think it's super important to have people that we can call upon when we have specific questions about business stuff, about technical stuff. So the way I do it is just, I like meeting people and going to events. Like I keep up with my network from college. I go to hardware events. I go to, I'm the kind of person that's like believes in serendipity and kind of I bias toward going to things, and so I've always had a handful of advisors from even in my first company, and now at Elroy we have a handful of advisors that are we call upon them when we need their input, and it's been really helpful, like both on business and technical, and I think we'll keep building that out. Like we're an aerospace company and a transportation company, and right now we're in our prototype phase and our seed phase, and so we've got we're a little heavier on like kind of business and technical advisors, but I think over time we're very likely to have some key advisors or even board members down the road that like come out of big aerospace, for instance, to give us insight into those decades of experience that are not going to be just naturally in our brains.
Yeah, and I also find the Elroy experience to be pretty interesting because a lot of kind of former coworkers have become advisors, and we've just kind of been in this field where there's just this huge evolving wealth of knowledge coming out of it, and so you'll always find that person that knows the cutting edge of where the state of the field is right now. And then I think another set of advisors that's been really amazing to kind of re-engage with is there's like all these manufacturers that some of them I've known since I was in my 20s that have kind of come back into the fold when we started work with Elroy. And these people have matured in their careers as well, and they're kind of filling us in on the state of the art and how this stuff is done, and how you can use things now for like purposes you wouldn't have even thought of back in the mid 2000s. But yeah, it's been pretty cool, like being able to dig into that group and take it on in this new context in aerospace.
So really taking advantage of your networks, not only the ones maybe over the last couple of years, but reaching back way farther. You never know who's going to help you, as you said, serendipity.
Yeah, and there's a blend sometimes between friends and advisors. And so, for instance, the team right here at Lemnos, I consider all of you guys friends and colleagues, and also advisors, and we talk about strategy together, and that's part of the network that's really valuable to us now.
Gotcha. What are the tools that you have found that have helped you most in building the company and building out your product? And when I say tool, it can be a process, it can be a physical object. What are the things that give you a little bit of an edge?
You should talk about 3D printing.
Sure, we can start. The performance parts company I founded started with the notion of getting race quality parts to people with smaller pocketbooks. And so I was able to do mass customization using 3D printing, and then actually was able to use those 3D printed parts as, what was being sold direct to the customer. Getting that first experience with, mass customization, I've gone and kind of carried that back into using it to ideate very quickly. So some of the just process I created around that are the types of things that we try to remind the team around. When you're doing your CAD, don't ever make it so anything's ever carved in stone. Make it so you can change things very, very rapidly and take advantage of tools that are already built into the software. So, I kind of took a business process and then we carried it back into how we do parametric modeling at Elroy, so we can change things very rapidly and never really lock ourselves into a decision when we know that we're going to have to iterate to get to the right final solution.
And then I would say on some other end of a spectrum, Google Docs and spreadsheets. I'm thinking kind of back to the customer development phase early on when we were trying to figure out what the right thing to make was. We use a lot of Google Docs.
And you used them because of the collaborative?
Yeah, because we could share it. Just like we just open a new doc every time I talk to an expert, every time I go talk to a potential customer, just open a new Google Doc, dump the trace of the conversation, share it, so everybody who needs to see it can see it. I think that's important for kind of achieving this shared, shared space of understanding in the company.
Did that infer some level of radical transparency inside of your company in terms of those customer interviews? Can everybody read them and sort of study, look at them and ask questions about them? How did you think about sort of information and amongst your team members?
Yeah, with that kind of information, we don't hold back. Our engineering team really wants to know, what have we learned from customers? They really want to make sure we're building the right thing. So I think we've never hidden that stuff. I've always tried to make as much of it available as I get.
What's been the most surprising thing that has happened to you in both the startup or the product or in the market to date? Right, knowing that you've still got some ways before you've reached your first full production product.
That's a good question. What's surprising? I think we've started to realize that we are becoming known in our industry, which, even though we feel like we're pretty early stage, it seems like it's happening, and that's a kind of pleasant surprise. We talked to one part of them. I'm trying to be a little bit discreet about who our customers are, but I'll say
one part of a customer
entity who's fairly disconnected from another, and it turns out that they already have heard about us and are keeping tabs on us. And somebody emailed me the other day saying they'd been following us for a long time and maybe interested to invest, and I was boggled by that. How could somebody be following us for a long time because we've had this very low profile web presence? But I think that, to me, that's the coolest surprise right now, is how we seem to be a contender in this space.
Yeah, you guys hadn't really to date gone out and courted any public knowledge about what you're doing. I mean, it's not like you're hiding, but you're also not advertising in any significant way.
Yeah, we wanted to be, we wanted to have something to show for ourselves before we attracted a lot of attention, basically. And so we're right at the precipice of that now, where I think we're going to share more about what we're doing.
Yeah. It was always hard to hide you guys when you were at Lemnos because it was just big.
Yeah, and it's also, I think it was good that we waited as well, because I think that there's this I don't know, it happens in every startup where you kind of think that you know the thing that you're supposed to be building, and then you dig deeper into your customer development and you're like, oh, now we know the thing that we're supposed to be building. Mm-hmm. So what we have now sitting out on the floor of our shop, which is probably sitting in the space of one of our squares at Lemnos, is, it represents a lot of maturing of that design. And so, I kind of feel like sometimes if you come out, too early and you're kind of starting to write basically write checks for things that you don't completely understand at a deeper level. It's unwise. And this is kind of like a cutting edge nugget of where aerospace is headed around electric, and we're just completely stoked that we did wait, because we've got genuine meat now to show to people.
Good stuff to show.
Yeah.
So you both have started multiple companies. What's the hardest part of being a hardware startup founder?
I don't know if this is unique to being a hardware startup founder, but for me, I will say it's just the moments of anxiety when I'm worried about how something is going to play out, or how long it's taking to get from point A to B, or something we're working on. Is this investor I'm talking to or can we seal the deal with this person? It's just, there's a lot of unknowns, and I think for me it's just kind of self-managing that internal state. I think there's this amazing blog post that Brad Feld wrote about how every founder carries around, I think he called it a bag of despair with them at all times. And even if you talk to a founder and it sounds great and they're doing awesome and they're killing it, it's guaranteed that there's some bag of something that's worrying them that they're not talking about. And I thought that was such a great thing to just write about, because it makes it more okay that that's there to talk about it.
I'd say on my side of it, and Dave has very respectfully made me aware of this, I'd say that it's probably self-care. I think sometimes you are going so hard at a problem that sections of just being a basic human start to break down. And so I think reminding yourself that if you don't take care of yourself, not only you suffer, but the company suffers. So that is something that I very sorely underestimated, and then have been taking a more searching inventory of it at Elroy. And I think it's serving me well. So I thank Dave for that.
I would see emails getting responded to at like 3:30 a.m. and then I knew that was not good.
I think that's also a great segue in terms of advice you would offer to other founders. Emails at 3:30 a.m. Warning.
Negatory. Do not do that.
Yeah.
What else would you, again, you've done this a while. When you, if you're staring at and are talking with a newer entrepreneur, what do you tell them? Hey, here's some things to think about as you're going on this voyage.
Reach out to people who can help you. That's one of the great things about the Valley, and just actually the global culture now of venture and innovation, is that people they want to connect. And so even if somebody seems like they are so senior and they've done it all and they're successful, and why would they want to talk to you, the first time startup founder? If you're in their space and you're doing something interesting, most people will make time to talk to somebody, even if they're green and new. So that's one of the biggest things that I feel I had enough pluck to do, even though I'm actually kind of an introvert. But you got to just do it. Most people will say yes to a coffee meeting.
Yeah, I think mine is more probably segueing a bit from the self-care thing I talked about. And I had in big block letters at my office at Airware, on this folded over sheet of 8.5 by 11, the letters TADLYB. And I would never tell people what it meant. It was there as a reminder for me. And one day, one of the PMs that I was working with said, "All right, dude, this thing has been up on your desk for months. You basically brought it in here with you, and you refuse to tell people unless they're in your inner circle what this means." And I said, "Well, Brian, you're close enough to my inner circle. I'll tell you." And it was basically my little abbreviation for "the aircraft doesn't love you back." And so that little note reminded me to go home and see my wife and kids more time than not, because the time that I spent with them, usually I'd come back the next morning totally refreshed and ready to tackle stuff. But yeah, I think it's really easy to get kind of wound up in wanting to make your product succeed, but that product is not going to succeed if your home life doesn't remain healthy during it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think both Dave and I have engaged in this, reinforcing what Dave was saying. We call it the dog patch walk, which is the opportunity to, we've done it, the three of us, and I think we've all done it with both staff and employees and members of the hardware community. It's all you have to do is call, and as long as you're willing to walk, we'll walk all over the dog patch, which is our local neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider that like corollary to getting enough sleep, is that if you're a founder that doesn't get enough exercise, which is probably more than 50%, try to do walking meetings. Just build it into your routine.
Yeah, we here at Lemnos, I started doing one-on-ones with my teammate on the basketball court. Mm-hmm. So when we come back bruised or battered, it's they're like, "Do I need to call somebody?" And I'm like, okay? "Nope, everything's good." So why did you guys choose to work with Lemnos?
Lemnos is awesome.
Well, thank you, but tell us more.
So I met Lemnos. I met Jeremy, I think, first years ago when Lemnos was just starting, and it was because I was already in the hardware startup community, and we got connected. And then I've just, because of my enthusiasm about new companies building hardware, I've just kept up with Lemnos ever since, basically. At hardware meetups and checking in periodically, and so. When I was leaving 3D Robotics, and we happened to connect around that time, and I think you mentioned like, hey, like you want to come and be an EIR with us. That seemed like a great next step, because what better way to like contribute back a bit and then also kind of figure out the next thing than to have kind of a situation of being fully embedded in a place where new cool hardware companies are getting started. So, and that made it very easy also when it was time to start the company, and Clint and I had realized what we wanted to do, to just flip the switch and start building right here in the same place where I'd been thinking and helping out.
Yeah, and for me, I think that I was sold on Lemnos after I met Jeremy, and I had no idea he had anything to do with Lemnos, and then kind of found out after the fact who he was. But like, he just kind of showed up at like a design review meeting one day when we were upstairs, and I was just like, wow, that guy was really cool. And Dave was like, he works here. But yeah, having somebody on the staff who'd been in the Air Force, kind of understood the how difficult aerospace was, and was like, yeah, we want to make this leap with you. They're just great.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like understanding the level of difficulty, but also recognizing the magnitude of the opportunity and wanting to go for it.
Yeah, it's always nice that day when you stare into the bag of despair. At least someone else next to you probably just closed their bag, and they're able to be like, oh, I see that look.
Well, that's one of the things I love about being here also. For the period of time that Elroy was growing in the Lemnos warehouse, was there's all these other companies around that are all pretty early stage, and there's a lot of sharing of knowledge that ends up happening, whether it's like, you're in the shop machining something and somebody walks past and like cocks their head at it and gives you an idea about how to do it better, or like setting up the company and how we're going to deal with some kind of, with like hiring or equity, or, there's people around that are just right across the table, essentially, who are going through similar things and figuring out similar things. And I think part of what I loved about it was, I really loved grad school. When I was at the MIT Media Lab, it was like being in this incredible playhouse full of technologists that were all working on different things, and everybody had their own project that was very different than everybody else's, but there was enough kind of shared domain of how we were making our things that we could help each other kind of with shop talk. And if you start a company at home in your garage, or if you started at a WeWork where everybody else is doing software, I don't think you'd find that same kind of cross-pollination that you do when everybody spends some time in a place together. And that's what makes grad school great, and that's what makes this place great.
Yeah, I totally think of Lemnos like grad school. But it's like grad school for grown-ups.
Yeah.
Because you get very different conversations with your advisors. And then The other really kind of kismet moment was when we realized that one of the co-founders here is an ex-V-22 Osprey pilot, and was giving us all of these insights into how spectacularly difficult that aircraft was, and how we are making something that wants to be the antithesis of that level of complexity. Yeah. So it's been great.
Gotcha. So my last question is always, it's the 25th hour of the day. You finally get home. You've stared at the bag of despair, and you need its antidote. A book, TV series, band, gadget. What is it? How do you unplug, or how do you return to the normal world after a really long day working on an amazingly complex but fun system?
I've got a pretty good home workshop.
I've seen it. It's pretty awesome.
And one of the things I do is go down there and build something. I've got not enough digital fabrication tools down there yet. I've got a Carvey from Inventables, but otherwise it's all woodworking materials.
I gotta show you what I've been making for the office over here on the Carvey.
So I either go down there and build something that I'm fixing around the house, or I bring my kids down there and we mill something out together, and that's just unwinding time for me.
Yeah, and for me it's a pretty close tie between just working on my Mini. Still have the same Mini from the business years ago. Kind of my wife knows that my mistress lives in the basement, which is great. And then doing thumbs up, thumbs down with my kid, listening to David Bowie. She has definite opinions about the entire Bowie catalog, and I love seeing how they're evolving. She's only 4.5, but man, good taste in music.
Have you got what's your match ratio on thumbs up, thumbs down? Different eras of Bowie for you two, or
it's unfortunately Freddie Mercury duets just seem to get consistent thumbs down. So I'm not going to deny that. Yeah, it just takes away from the Bowie.
Well, guys, thank you so much for your time, and we'll be including some information on how to get a hold of you, all wrapped around the podcast.
Sounds good. Thanks for having us, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Into the Forge. For our next episode, I'm excited to interview the founders of FarmWise, who are building autonomous robots for organic agriculture. If you have questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me via the email address podcast@lemnos.vc. And for older episodes, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or listen to episodes on the Lemnos VC website.